Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Adam Rift. I don't think my dog is really a dog. I'm currently hiding in my closet shaking in fear. I'm typing this out on my phone, so I'm sorry if there's a formatting issue or grammar, but I don't really give a fuck right now. In case I don't make an update to this post, please report this to the authorities or anyone, please. I don't know what to fucking do. During April of 2018 I adopted a 5-month-old puppy from the pound. I was lucky enough to get her out of that hell hole and into my loving home. She was a border collie mix and her name was Nellie. I don't know what the fuck happened to her, but what I have now is not my dog. She was a timid little pup when I first took her home. I remember she was inside for at least 5 minutes before she peed on the carpet. I could only laugh and kiss her because I was so happy. She slept in my bed that night, and for many more nights to come. She only weighed maybe 6 or 7 kilograms when I first picked her up. The months that followed were amazing. For the first time since I graduated high school I was over the moon. Every day when I got home from work she would rush to greet me with her lead dangling from her mouth, her tail wagging wildly. She absolutely loved to grab the newspaper from the mailbox with me. She was also an awesome chick magnet, but that's besides the point. She loved my neighbor, a nice man named Paul whose wife had recently passed away from breast cancer. He was an older gentleman, well into his 50s, but never looked a day over 40. He liked to throw a barbecue for the few neighbors we had in our little rural community. He always made an effort, so we all returned the favor with bringing food and beer. Things began to change in December of 2018. In the early hours of the morning on the 5th, I believe, Nellie woke me up. I grabbed my glasses from the bedside table and flicked on the lamp. She was stood about a meter from the door, pointing right at it. I could hear a low growl emanating from her. Curious, I got out of bed and opened the door. To her surprise, there was nothing there. I thought that would have been the end of it. A few more days pass, and on the 9th it happened again, early hours of the morning and pointing at the door. This continued for the next week. I believe this is when Nellie disappeared. At about 2 a.m. on the 21st, Nellie woke me up and wanted to go outside. She would do this once every few weeks, so it was nothing out of the ordinary. She would wake me up by licking my face and then sulk and lay down in front of the door if I wouldn't get up. Behind my backyard is a forest that extends for miles. Sometimes Nellie liked to hunt down rabbits and possums when we would go for a walk through the woods. When I let her out that night, she walked to about 5 meters before the tree line. I watched her pee and she started her way back to the house. This is when things didn't go exactly as planned. She must have heard something because she whipped around and pointed at the trees and growled. I thought it might have been a rabbit, but thinking back on it now, it was probably something much worse. She barked, then made a beeline for the trees. She disappeared into the thickness before I heard more barking. Then nothing. Absolute silence. I was about to grab a torch and put on my red bands, but then the trees started rustling. There was no wind. It was distressing to say the least. Then they stopped. I called out her name and waited. About a minute later she wandered out of the trees and back inside. I thought nothing of it and promptly went back to sleep. I should have thought about it. As the months continued, things got weird. She stopped wanting to go on walks, she cut back on her food and began to get skinnier. I decided to change up her diet from dog biscuits to meat. She liked that. She really liked that. Sometimes she would run off into the woods to go hunting for rabbits or anything she could get her paws on. I also noticed she began to get bigger. Not fat bigger, because as she got bigger it looked like she got skinnier. Then she stopped playing with her toys. That weirded me out the most because her beloved squeaky duck toy I got for her the day she came home was always with her inside the house. Now it lay gathering dust in the corner of my room. But she began to show a liking to the barbecue get-together Paul would throw. A little too much. Honestly, that should have been a warning sign. That day was the 26th of February, 2019. In the following weeks, people unfortunately died. It was small to begin with, that makes it sound better than it was. Old people died first. As sad as it sounded, we all thought it was because of old age. Then we got the details. Horrific details. They were murders, violent and bloody murders. We were absolutely shit scared then. Paul and I started communicating a lot more than we used to, a text every hour or so just to check in, or maybe a phone call or a two. He told me I should keep the key for my gun safe in the lock in case of an emergency. I listened. I listened because I trusted him. I listened because he was one of my only friends. This brings us to tonight, the 24th of March. I awoke to the sound of gunfire. I rushed over to my curtains and yanked them open. Paul's house was on fire. I immediately rushed to put on some thick clothes and grabbed a flashlight and my phone ready to dial 111 for a fire truck. At the time I didn't even notice my bedroom door was open when I clearly remember closing before I went to bed that night, nor did I notice Nellie was missing. I yanked open my back door and I froze. It was illuminated by the bright fire of Paul's home. It stood on its hind legs, tall and lanky. Completely black with white highlights over its body. The eyes were almost a glowing red. Its claws were massive, and sadly one set was clearly protruding through Paul's chest. I actually don't know. It felt like so long ago even though it was only an hour ago. I couldn't feel a thing. I couldn't even feel the flashlight slip through my fingers and land heavily on the concrete ground of my back patio. I instantly realized my mistake and I saw it look at me. It looked me deep in the eye and I saw her. Her. My sweet girl. My Nellie. Or more rather, what was pretending to be Nellie. It dropped Paul to the ground and terrifyingly reared its head into the air and howled deeply. It sounded like a mix between the sound of absolute pain and what I could only describe as Lupin's howl from Prisoner of Azkaban. That was the only motivation I needed to run. I hauled ass into my bedroom and dived into my closet and shut the door. I covered myself in dirty washing and stayed still. It felt like I laid there for a few million years. It walked, or skulked more rather, into my room. I heard its claws clatter across the hardwood floor before stopping. I couldn't see a fucking thing, but I heard it howl once again before it sounded like it tore my bed to fucking bits. I heard glass smash and hard objects collide with the walls. Then nothing. Complete silence once again before I heard I skulk off and leave the house. Probably to finish eating my friend. It's now 7 a.m. I can hear sirens outside but I'm too afraid to leave lest that thing is waiting for me on the other side of the door. The inky thing I could do for the last few hours was type this out and do research. But it didn't make sense. I googled everything I remembered about that thing. I got a result that I'm fairly certain is what it is. It didn't make fucking sense. I read pages upon pages of this fucking thing, looked at artwork, folklore. Everything. It doesn't make sense. The research says the location of the creature is found in the United States, usually on Native American land. So what in the living is a goddamn Wendigo doing in rural New Zealand? Second story. This story was shared by you/darkraven. I found a phone in the woods, and this is what was on it. Alright, first off, this isn't my story. I found a phone out in the woods near my house. They have been bulldozing and taking down trees to build new houses, and I like to walk around and see what they've done. I do not know the woman that posted this, or what her Reddit handle was, but I know that she wanted it up here because she believed we were the only people that would believe her. Her phone was pretty banged up and has absolutely no service. I figured this was the least I could do for her. From here on, these are the words of a Mrs. Helena White. October 9th, 2013. My name is Helena White. I am 36-year-old female from Kentucky, which is where I currently am. I need someone to see this, though by the time you do I will already be dead. I don't have internet access here, just my cell phone that's dying and has 100% no service. I have scheduled this to upload to Reddit, where people actually believe the weird things we all have to say to each other, if anyone ever finds it. Everyone there has an open mind and can at least know the truth. I have also scheduled one to go to the police station, but they will never find me. The best they can do is give my family the news. I feel terrible for my mother, that she will never know what happened, never have a body to bury, never have closure. No one I know will, but at least they will know that I am gone. It's better this way, believe me. If they knew the truth they would never sleep again, and no doubt they would hunt for me. Again, though, they will never find me. I will be dead, just not gone. I know you all on Reddit have heard some seriously crazy shit. I mean, I read about the girl that found that weird creature/house thing in the woods right here in Kentucky a couple of months ago, and I've seen people talk about everything from zombies and ghouls to ghosts and vampires. If there is anywhere that will listen and know my story is true, it is here with you guys. I should explain. My husband Jeff and I headed out into the wilderness. I probably shouldn't say exactly where, because I really don't want this to happen to someone else. It's better to let it stay here with Jeff and me. But it is a very beautiful and remote patch of forest that extends for many miles. It is a very large place and does see visitors ever so often, but the seclusion of it is one thing Jeff and I both love. We had been planning this trip for months and were seriously excited that it was finally time to go. We had everything you can imagine for camping for a full 2 weeks out here in the beautiful wilderness: rain-proof tent, dishes, cookware, food, water. We were ready for roasting marshmallows and hot dogs over the open fire, hiking and admiring the beauty all around us. Yes, I am aware that this makes me seems like a hippie, and maybe I am a little bit, but I really love the outdoors, especially the woods. Anyway, Jeff and I had planned this right down to every last detail and were ready for the perfect, tranquil and rejuvenating camping trip. That isn't what we got, though. 2 days in we got caught in a huge thunderstorm and had to hunker down inside our tent while the wind and rain beat so loudly against the sides and top of our little rainproof tent that we thought we might be blown away. Just as quickly as it came, it was over and the sun started shining again. If you've ever lived in or visited Kentucky for any amount of time, you know what I mean when I say that this was seriously just typical Kentucky weather. It's kind of our thing, I guess. 1 minute blaring storm, next, sunshine and birds singing. After that nice little downpour, every bit of our gathered firewood was soaked and they weren't drying up anytime soon. Jeff went to find more wood and I decided to stay behind and clean out the fire pit, so it would actually burn the wood Jeff brought back. It was starting to get dark, and if we didn't have a fire we would be cold and unprotected. I had gotten it suitably ready when Jeff came flying out of the ever-darkening woods. He did not have any firewood. I was a little upset by this since it was already nearly completely dark. Jeff, what the is all I was able to get out before Jeff was at me, throwing one arm around me and one over my mouth. I was terrified at this point. What was this? Why was he doing this to me? But I could hear him mumbling, "Oh fuck, 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 fuck." Please pardon my language, but he was mumbling that over and over in my ear. I knew what that meant too. It was bad and about to get worse. I heard my husband's voice in my ear again. "Helly," his nickname for me. "When I say run, I want you to run as fast as you can back to the car and get the hell out of here." Okay. I was terrified at this point. What the hell had he seen, and was it coming for him? I moved his hand off my mouth and stated, "I'm not just going to run off and leave you, Jeff, and you know that. I have seen my husband scared only once in the 15 years I've known him. It was right after his father had a heart attack and they didn't think he was going to make it." Jeff and his brother Dean paced the floor back and forth. Once I went to stop Jeff, to try to comfort him, but when I caught his eye, my heart broke. I grabbed him and held on as tightly as I could until his silent sobbing finally subsided. The look I saw when I caught his eye this time was so much worse than the last one. He was terrified of losing his father, but this was like he had reached a new level of fear. Before I could ask him anything else, we heard this god-awful roar. I mean, this thing could have shaken houses. It was the most terrifying and unexplainable sound I have ever heard. Jeff grabbed me, kissed my forehead and told me to run. I didn't obey. I probably should have, considering how things turned out, but it's done. Not 2 seconds later, this monstrosity of a creature comes barreling into our camp and within view. I am a little embarrassed to say that I screamed like a little girl. I think most people would have. This thing is so hard to describe, but I am going to try my best. This thing was at least 9 feet tall, maybe taller. Either way, he was big. What really threw me off though wasn't how high he stood over me, it was how skinny he was. I can't describe to you how skinny he was. It was like he had never eaten in his life, like skin simply draped over bones. His bones rippled through his gangly leathered skin. It looked like giant worms wriggling as he moved. His arms were almost as long as he was tall. They could stretch much farther than a typical man could, and he sort of looked like he just rose from the hell of the earth. He had a large head that looked like that of a deer, only a psychotic evil deer from Satan. His nose elongated and dripped with white, foamy drool. Just like a deer, he had long knotty horns that branched from the tip of his skull. That leathery-looking skin was grayed and patchy with what appeared to have been hair at one time, with his hands and feet sprouting out what looked like weeds, like a big pile of hay had been stuffed up his sleeves. If he had had any, I might have been more relieved. The creature stood, watching for a moment, taking us in as we did him. I was terrified. I had never seen anything like that before. The scariest thing I have ever encountered in the woods was a wolf, but luckily it was alone and didn't appear to be hungry, so he just turned and jaunted off. This thing was quite the opposite. He looked hungry and determined. I started to scream uncontrollably. Apparently it didn't like that. He let out a roar at us, blowing that foul-smelling drool all over us, that sounded like everything you can think of dying and screaming in their death all at once. He then extended one of his giant arms and smacked me with it, and grabbing Jeff before I could even get back up. I heard a rumbling sound as he pulled my husband closer to him. I realized with horror that rumbling was of hunger. Jeff was gone in an instant. The creature snapped his head off like a doll, and swallowed in one quick gulp. He began just biting into Jeff's body like he was some kind of sandwich or something. The crunching was the worst. Trust me, it is a horrid sound no one ever needs to hear. I threw up, screamed, and then remembered that Jeff had told me to run. I was too late though, because just as I was pulling myself, painfully I might add, out of the brush pile I had landed in, the monster was done with Jeff. Just like that, the man I knew for 15 years, the man I called my husband for 14 years, was just gone, but then he came back. The monster taunted me by becoming reflective. As he moved, a facade of Jeff took his place. I could see my husband, like he had become him, but I could see through it too to the monster behind the disguise as well. Perhaps it was because I saw the monster before he changed. I don't know. Whatever the case may be, that thing can take the form of people it has killed and eaten, or at least, that's my best guess. I finally freed myself from the brush and took off, full speed ahead toward the direction of the car, my husband's melodic voice filling my mind, my ears, my very core, beckoning me back. He was so convincing that I almost turned back. I fell into a huge hole. I think it was a trap. I just don't know if it was a trap from people for that monster, or a trap built by the monster to catch people. Either way, I fell at least 20 feet and my leg is broken in 3 places. I can't even move it. I'm going nowhere. I'm sitting here writing this now because I can still hear my husband's voice calling for me, and sometimes the monster's roar. He is looking for me, but he thankfully went the wrong way. I know what's going to happen though. He'll be back shortly and he will kill me, and then he will steal my face. So, please, if you ever find this, anyone, get out of these woods now. And don't come looking for me. I am dead. We both are, and some horrible monster is wearing our faces so he can eat you too. Mom, I love you so much. Don't come looking for me. Goodbye. Helena White. Me again. I can tell you this, I'm not going back out into those woods. Quick update, apparently you should not Google the name of the woman above, Helena White, as she appears to be a porn star. When I Google my name I get sent to a boob page. It kinda sucks. Anyway, for those of you wondering, let me try to explain it a little better. I live about a mile from where they have been logging. They are building a new road, one that is supposed to make it easier on us all to get around. Basically, they are bypassing our town. But, the important part is that before they started the logging I spent a lot of time back into those woods. I liked the solitude and atmosphere, at least, I did. I don't know how I got lucky enough to find that phone, but it was in a huge pile of dirt, barely sticking out of the side. They are ripping the place apart back there. I suppose it does have to be level for a roof though, right? I brought the phone home, of course it was dead. I was able to charge it with an older universal charger my dad has. It was a fairly nice phone, and I thought I might be able to clean it up and give it to my little brother if I could get it working. I did. I went through it and I came across this message in a notepad app. I have absolutely no idea who this woman is, nor did I know that there is a porn star with the same name. LOL, sorry about that. As for the monster she keeps talking about, I don't have a single clue. I have never seen or heard about anything like that around here. Our campfire stories and old legends are pretty much the Goat Man and Bigfoot, so your guess is as good as mine. I thought of a Wendigo and a Skinwalker, but there have never been any stories of anything like that around here that I know of. Third story. This story was shared by you/colloquial_eloquence. Need help identifying what I saw in the woods? I'll be as short as I can with the backstory. This took place about 5 years ago. I live in an area semi-near the Appalachian Mountains, and spend quite a bit of time in the woods. The area I live in is known for being out in the boonies, and sketchy stuff is common, creepy hunters, weird houses, etc., and usually joked about. My friend and I, we'll call him Conley, used to be the dynamic duo of woodland exploration. We would trek miles upon miles every day, and for our age at the time, middle school, that was fairly impressive. So, one summer's afternoon, Conley and I are several minutes into our trek. The plan was to hike to a beautiful cow pasture and feed the cows. We're walking through a pretty dense part of the woods, ferns, ivy, big trees. From what I can remember, we were oddly quiet. There was something off about the ambience of the woods. Birds and bugs usually have a certain rhythm, they call and respond. It was almost like some of the animals were afraid to respond. This lack of communication on the animals' behalf made us uneasy, but we both continued to walk. To this day, I have never heard nature go out of beat like that. It's like when you're having a confidential conversation and someone walks by that shouldn't be hearing it and you have to make up a decoy conversation. People pick up on it. It's easy to tell when communication doesn't have a rhythm. So, we are walking, ignoring the odd calls and chirps, and suddenly from directly above us, a large branch snaps. I say large because it didn't sound like a twig popped, it sounded like a substantial section of the tree exploded. We look up and see a mass, presumably the tree branch, falling towards the earth. It smacks into the ground about 10 feet in front of us, and immediately my heart stops. The woods has gone completely, and I mean completely silent. Looking at the branch on the ground, I realize that there are two objects in front of me. The first is the branch, which is large enough to hold over 150 pounds. As my brain tries to comprehend the second object, I realize first that it has unhealthy gray skin. Yes, skin. Next, I see that it is skinny. It has long limbs, with pointy elbows and kneecaps. My entire body is frozen. This creature stands up on two legs, completely silently, and is easily a foot taller than me, so about 7.5 feet tall, and that's when I notice its legs are reversed. Like Mr. Tumnus from Narnia. My eyes follow its body up to its head and I see that it has an extremely elongated nose, almost like a dog's snout. Its eyes, which are black, pass over me and look right at Conley. It has teeth. Big, yellow, disgusting carnivorous teeth. Around then my fight or flight reaction kicks in, as this entire ordeal has only taken about 3 to 5 seconds. I look at Conley, he looks at me, and we haul ass in the opposite direction. I'm positive it's chasing us, I can hear movement behind me. I imagine it running on 2 legs, and I think to myself, it's going to eat me, it's definitely going to eat me. After a few minutes of sprinting and pondering death, we approach his house. We were sure we had lost the creature. The sounds of the woods came back, this time everything had a natural rhythm. In between heavy breaths we say, "Dude, what the hell was that?" Conley is pale, and I guess I am too. He says, "It looked like Professor Lupin as a werewolf from Harry Potter, right? You saw that too, right?" There was no doubt I saw it too, and the scary part was that his description was accurate, especially the skin color and overall starved look it had. So, no sleep community, help me out here. Is it a skinwalker? Some kind of goat man? I've done lots of research trying to find answers, but I figured I'd come to guys for advice. I can barely go into that section of the woods, and if I do, I'm very uncomfortable and always looking into the trees. The thing that throws me off is that it stood up silently, but I could hear it running behind us. 4th story. This story was shared by you/LucyBoo_22. The Wendigo that didn't leave me alone. I honestly don't know where to start or if I'm ready to be posting this story of mine. But hopefully it'll help. I know you won't believe me, and honestly I won't even blame you guys. It still doesn't make sense in my own head. I've heard stories about unknown creatures in woods but never thought I'd encounter one myself, you know. I posted another story about some creepy old people that I had encountered in the woods, but that's nothing. This makes a good horror story for people, but it eats me every day. But here we go. I love to go hiking. I go with my 3-year-old German Shepherd, and let her go unleashed since we like to go to secluded places. Now I have been hiking all over Utah mountains, and wanted a new hike that wasn't too far from me. I have an app that tells me about hikes near me, if it is a hard hike, reviews, and if it's dog friendly. Now I was scrolling through all trail looking for possibly something new, but I wasn't too hopeful. But to my delight, there was something new. I don't know why I don't remember the name of it, but I do remember it was at the bottom of the list and it had one review saying, "Good." I thought that was kind of strange, mostly because people love to review hikes and try to tell the city what they can do to improve the hike and make it more safe, but I figured it wasn't a popular hike. So the next day Kyrie and I packed up our stuff and went up towards the hike. I always carry first aid kit, extra food, a knife, and just emergency stuff in case I get lost. It's important to mention now that Kyrie eats a raw diet. Meaning she eats raw meat, not cooked, and since we were going so early in the morning I thought I could bring some with us. I put it in her blue backpack I make her wear and decided when it was getting warmer we would stop to eat. Where I live, there's a long drive through the canyon and many roads going towards the hike you'd like to go on. This one was a little further than I'm used to, but I didn't care, it was new and I was excited, so was Kyrie. She cries in the car until we get there. Now I was following the directions on my phone and saw that it had led me towards a thin road that was hidden. No wonder I haven't heard of this place, it was hidden and far up the mountain. The road only fit one car, so the whole time I was so anxious that another car would come down, and how I would handle that, but there never was. I never saw another car. When I got to the parking lot, if I could call it that, I noticed there was only space for like 3 cars. All in a tight space. It was small, so I decided to park my car with the front facing towards the road. I thought maybe it was private property, checked the app, but it didn't say anything about private property. I shrugged it off, got Kyrie out, prepared us, and saw the trail. Now even though I knew there wasn't anyone parked there, I kept Kyrie on a leash. I didn't know if there were bikers along the trail, but after 30 minutes or so I didn't see anyone. I decided to let her off leash. It was a steep hike for the first half, but it was beautiful. We were deep in the woods, and I felt at peace. I used to wear headphones when I hiked but didn't anymore, so I was enjoying the natural sounds of the forest. It was still early in the morning, so I wore a light jacket and decided when it got warmer I'd give Kyrie her breakfast. Now before you start to hate, I know bringing Kyrie's raw meat was absolutely stupid and ignorant of me. I had never seen a bear or wolf or anything, so I got cocky and just thought it was okay. I learned my lesson the bad day, so no need to tell me I was dumb. But honestly, I wouldn't blame you if you commented that. Now here is where we begin the bad part of this story. The trail finally stopped being steep and sort of an easy hike from here. When you got to the top, you could see through the trees a beautiful open meadow. On the other side of it, you can hear a river and a waterfall. The trail went around the meadow. The meadow was absolutely beautiful with the mountains in the background, the sound of the water. This hike was almost the most beautiful one I had ever been to. When Kyrie and I were sort of in the center of the meadow, she stopped right in front of me and looked towards the meadow. Kyrie always walked ahead of me, and when she stopped I stopped since I trusted her judgment. Before I could look, the smell hit me first. You know, the typical rotting smell, but oh my God. Words cannot explain how bad it stank. It burned my nose, and started to make me tear up. I put my shirt over my nose, feeling nauseous, and looked over to where Kyrie was looking. In the middle of the meadow was a deer. Now I've only seen does but never a male deer in person. But his antlers were huge. Have you ever seen Princess Mononoke? When he sees the deer spirit walking across the water, and how big his antlers were. Almost like that. The beauty of the deer was amazing, but not enough to take away the disgusting smell that was making me sick. The deer was looking towards the mountains and away from me. I thought maybe Kyrie's food was going bad. I checked that and it seemed fine. When I looked up again, the deer was looking towards our direction. I noticed that Kyrie's hackles went up at that. She started to cry nervously. Now I've heard of Wendigos and skinwalkers. I am Native American. It is common for these creatures to be in our childhood stories. That, and also listening to scary stories on YouTube. Now when Kyrie did that, I got a bad feeling in my stomach despite the sickness. It was a Wendigo and I knew that. Now I didn't know what to do. These creatures were only a part of my stories to make me go to bed, not to instructions of what to do. Plus my grandmother was the one with the stories and passed away. She was the one with the experience, not my mom or anyone else. I glanced at Kyrie again when she cried, and looked back towards the creature. It started to stand on its hind legs. Holy hell, it was fucking tall, and it faced my direction. It started to walk towards me. I was going to run until I heard in my head, I am the one of this land. Suddenly it started to run towards me, full speed. I screamed, called Kyrie and started to run. Kyrie was following behind me. I started to cry as I was running since I could hear it catch up to me. It was loud. It was destroying everything it came in contact with to get to me. The adrenaline running through me was making me just focus on running. I didn't know where to go, I just ran. The trail suddenly got smaller and bushes with thorns started to appear, but I didn't feel them as they cut my arms. As I heard it got closer, it suddenly went to the left as I ran straight. I somehow had the balls to look back to see it was gone, but also Kyrie. Kyrie, I said, but right as I called out for her, the trail ended with a foot drop onto a patch of rocks. I hit my head, bleeding a bit. But again I couldn't feel it that much and just got up. I looked towards the forest when I suddenly heard a loud cry from my right. It was Kyrie. Kyrie. I cried out. I stood up, crying and lost at what to do. I looked back to see a river leading up to the waterfall I heard. Suddenly a heavy weight ran into me and we both fell back. I hit my head again on the back and looked up to see Kyrie. Kyrie had blood all over her. It was pouring from her neck. Kyrie. I cried out. She was whimpering, and breathing heavy. She still had her backpack on with some cuts in it. Before I had a chance to help her, a scream came from the forest. I looked back at the waterfall, and somehow had the strength to pick up my 85-pound dog and carry her. I don't know where I was planning to go. I was just running to the waterfall as if it was a safe place. I was almost there when I heard the creature land on the rocks that I did early. I tripped at that and looked back to see it looking at me. Its eyes were black, or I think so. It could also be that there wasn't anything in there. I don't know. I took off Kyra's backpack and threw it towards the monster, hoping it would take the meat and just leave us alone. I was scooting back towards the waterfall, crying as I did so. Holding and dragging Kyrie with my left arm. I found that being so close to the creature made me literally weak to my knees. It walked over to me, taking huge steps. It looked so different than before. Before it looked like a deer, and now as it crawled over to me it looked like a monster. I don't know how else to describe this awful demon, I don't. I'm sorry. But I felt water hit my head hard as I had reached the waterfall. I kept going until I was up against the wall. There barely enough space where water wasn't hitting Kyrie and his faces. Kyrie felt limp at this point. I could somewhat see the creature through the water, but still saw it coming towards me. It stood on its hind legs when it was close enough to me, watching me. The smell was so disgusting, I couldn't help but throw up in my mouth. It reached his arms out to grab me. I screamed so loud. I actually lost my voice. After I let out that scream, another scream came from the deep forest. The creature snapped its head almost completely backward, looking towards the scream. The scream sounded like the one this one had let out earlier. I was still holding on to Kyrie, crying and screaming since its arm was close. It looked back to me, pulling its arm away, and again said in my mind, "I am the one of this land." With that, it took steps back watching me and went down the river bank. It crawled on all fours, stopping next to Kyra's backpack. It ripped it apart and pulled out the meat, eating it with the plastic bag that it was in. It suddenly screamed and ran towards that direction of the scream from earlier. When I thought it was gone, I stood up shakily and carried Kyrie towards the trail again. When I was running, I came across my backpack that I had left earlier and stopped. It was ripped apart, so I took off my jacket and wrapped it around Kyra's neck where she was bleeding a lot. After that, I barely remember. All I remember is carrying Kyrie and driving down, screaming the whole way towards the emergency vet. They asked us what happened and I told them it was a bear. They called the ambulance since I had blood all over me and they couldn't tell if it was mine or Kyra's. Kyrie made it through surgery and had to have some stitches on her, along with a pad. It didn't really heal and a huge bump grew on there. It had been infected but eventually got better. She also had a bite mark on the top of her left eye, but that healed much better. They pulled out a 4-inch tooth. I don't have it because I couldn't even look at it, but they declared it from a bear. Even though they said it looked weird. While I was waiting for Kyrie, I went to look up the trail on the app, and it was gone. Why or how, but it is. I don't remember where it is either. That's all a blur. I have some pictures up of Kyrie. The one with my niece is a hike my mom took her on with my niece. It had been weeks after and my mom thought to try and help her through it. Kyrie looks nervous in the picture, but you can see the huge bump on the left side of her neck. There's also a picture with Kyrie and her bandages around her neck. And the one that is the most recent of her neck, it's black. The stitches came out. The last picture is of the top of her head, also black, but it's healed now. I'll have pictures of these but don't know where or how to post these. I haven't been hiking since, and I refuse to let Kyrie go. That time my mom took her, she did it while I was at work but regretted it because she said Kyrie was crying and was so scared they had to just go home. My mom knows, I screamed at night from nightmares for a week or two. My mom put white candles in my room to get rid of the bad spirits attracted to my negativity. So yeah, here's my story. I've heard stories where people saw a Wendigo and they didn't get harmed, and God, I wish I went through that. I hate hiking. My therapist thinks I may have some PTSD but only knows of it as a bear. I'm getting through it, Kyrie is too. Hopefully one day I can go back, but I don't see that being for a while. Please, if you're going to go up to the mountains, please prepare. Mother Nature is not only unpredictable but has things in there that just don't make sense in our heads. So please be safe. I say that with serious sincerity. If there's any other subreddits I can post this to, I would love to know, so I can share my story and maybe help others out there. Thanks for reading. Sixth story. This story was shared by you/Bloodhunter62. Your friendly neighborhood Wendigo. Before I begin, I'm a 16-year-old male. About 3 years ago, I was in Virginia visiting family over summer. We were right outside the DC area and staying in a 2-story house near the freeway. On the other side of the freeway was a forest. So my mom, her boyfriend Eric, and I were all staying with Eric's parents. We had brought some night vision binoculars and decided that tonight was the perfect time to use them. So, after dinner, we gear up and head out. We pass under the freeway and head into the woods. When we get about 5 minutes into the forest, we set down our bag and take out our binocs. My mom looks around with them for a while, seeing a few squirrels here and there. She gets tired of them and passes them to me. I look around for a while, being careful not to look at the freeway for fear of being blinded. I spot something behind a tree about 50 feet to our left. I concentrate on it, trying to figure out what it is. It looks like a pale, bald anorexic man looking straight at us from behind the tree. I get a bit uneasy, but I'm hesitant to believe it's really there. I ask Eric to take a look, just in case. To my despair, he sees it too. He describes it much the same way I did. Now, Eric is a former amateur boxer and I train MMA almost every day, but neither one of us wants to stick around with that thing. We start heading back to the house, crossing under the freeway. We take another look behind us as a car comes by. All three of us see glowing eyes lit up by the headlights on the other side of the freeway. We say fuck that and head back to the house. When we get back, Eric's parents are asleep and my mom and Eric go upstairs to the guest room. There's only one guest room, so I have the couch downstairs. I'm a little too excited after seeing the thing in the woods, so I end up staying up all night. Around 3 a.m., I'm watching TV and start hearing footsteps above me. I immediately remember our earlier encounter and panic a little. I try to calm down and tell myself it's just one of the dogs or maybe someone who couldn't sleep. I keep hearing the footsteps for a while, until I hear a doorknob jiggle. I find it weird that they're trying to open a locked door, but try to ignore it. They stop, walk around for a few more minutes, and then it's quiet again. I stay up until the sun starts coming up and then pass out. My mom wakes me up and I remember the footsteps from the night before. I describe what happened and ask if one of them got up at any time. She says no and I think it must have been one of the dogs. That is, until she tells me the room above me is the office. No one was in the office and the door stays locked at night. My heart sinks as I piece it all together. I don't know if it was that thing for sure, but I think it was. I've done a lot of research since then, trying to figure out what that thing was that night. I found 2 creatures that seemed to match it. I think it was either a skinwalker or Wendigo. Whichever one it was, I'm just thankful that door was locked. I know I wouldn't be able to fight that thing no matter how tough I am. 7th story. This story was shared by you/RetsmaH6. Message from a Wendigo. I have been trapped here for too long. I can never forget the day I was taken. It was the dead of night. I had just killed my prey, a woman who had been foolish enough to wander into my home. I remember how happy I was that day, that I did not have to hunt, instead the food brought itself to me. If only I had known then, that my delight would soon turn into terror. The men came into my home and overpowered me. There were 3 of them. They were large, much larger than the normal men I hunted. perhaps in different circumstances, would have killed and consumed them. But I was injured at the time. Not a grave injury, but it impeded me still. I had received the wound a week before, from a particularly resilient man. He had beat at my foot with a rock, damaging my ankle, even as I straddled his chest, tearing his throat open. Looking back, I still find myself appreciating the man's sheer will. But I appreciated his flesh much more. Even without the injury, the men would have been difficult to conquer. As I said, they were large, but not only that. They were carrying strange metal poles. They were warriors of some kind. The poles fired darts that struck me and made me drowsy. The men threw me into a metal carriage that moved by means I knew not, and still do not know. It was within this carriage I lost consciousness. I awoke, I know not when, in a metal cage. I was still in a slight daze. There were men all around, all just as large as the three who had attacked me. Initially, I was ecstatic. I was surrounded by food, and I did not see any of the men who had taken me. These ones did not have any metal poles, so they were easy prey. But when I attempted to escape, I found myself unable to damage the cage in any way. I shrieked and roared, and bashed at the cage. The men flinched in fear, and some pulled smaller metal objects from pouches at their hips. I drew myself to my full height, still towering above the men, despite them being larger than the ones I was accustomed to. I felt something hit me in my back, and I turned my head to see another dart had struck me. One of the men who had taken me had been behind me the whole time, on the other side of the cage, and he had fired another dart at me. Once again, I fell unconscious. When I awoke again, I was in a room. It was larger than the cage I had previously been, 10 paces wide and double across. But, this one did not offer the commodity of being able to see out of it. The walls were hard stone, and the door a harder metal. I tried to break out for hours, but I could not. I laid upon the ground, only thinking of my hunger. I was utterly ravenous. Whether it was morning, noon, or night, I had no way of knowing. All I knew was how famished I was. Even if only one day had passed since I had last eaten, it still would have been one day too many without food. My capture was, regrettably, my fault and mine alone. I had grown complacent. I was situated in a location with much prey, and I stayed for too long. I have lived for hundreds of years, and I have hunted in many places. I have preyed upon men of every color and creed. I have always hidden my tracks, and never stayed in one place for too long. But I was lulled into a false sense of security. My home, a deep cavern, was one I thought no man would find me in. I should have fled when that woman entered my home. If she could find her way in, of course warriors could. I curse my foolishness, but I must look forward. The past cannot be undone. All of this happened a while ago. I can only estimate the length of time that has passed. I assume it to be a fortnight. 1 fortnight, stuck in this prison. 1 fortnight too many. The men frequently take me from the room. They always do it the same way. A small part of the door is opened, and meat is thrown in. I devour it, for I am starving, always. I am rendered comatose moments afterwards. They have poisoned the food. In the brief seconds before I am unconscious, I can see the door open and men enter. I always awake in the same room, but in a different position from where I fainted. I know the men are taking me somewhere and returning me. I know not where they are taking me, nor what they are doing to me. The only way to avoid this would be not to eat the meat, and that is no option at all. My hunger will not allow it. Sometimes, the men try to speak to me. I can speak their simple language, of course. But I say nothing to them. I have no interest in doing so. Most of the time, the men leave me be. Sometimes, if I roar and bellow and strike at the walls too much, 5 men will enter the room, and hit me with darts. I have attempted to attack them, but their strength is shocking. I have grown weak since I arrived here. The men wrapped my injured foot in something. I am unsure of what it is, or what nefarious purpose it serves. I live in fear. I fear man. Man, whom I have preyed upon since I was created by the Great Spirit. Man, who have feared me, and indeed feared all Wendigos, now have made me feel fear. I fear their metal poles. I fear their size. I do not know why these ones are so big. A different tribe, perhaps. I am ashamed of myself for feeling this way. It is as if I am their pet. I often wonder where they get the meat from. It is man meat, without a doubt. They tried to feed me other things, but I can only consume man meat. These men must kill and butcher their own kind to get it. Perhaps they consume other men as well. I shudder at the depravity of it. The thought of killing, or even worse, consuming my own kind, other Wendigos, makes me sick. I don't know what the people will do to me. I have heard a story of a Wendigo that was slaughtered by men. They chopped off his legs, then later cut him to small pieces. I imagine they will do something similar to me. Today, when I awoke, I found paper in my room. So, I write this message. I write it in my native tongue, which only Wendigos know, and is simply nonsensical gibberish to humans. I have no way of knowing where this message will go, but it is my only option. If any of my kind somehow finds this, please save me. I will forever be in your debt. Dr. K. Bowman. The preceding transcript was written by a man named Ned Terrell. Canadian, 2.05 m tall, 34 years old. Worked as a dentist. Him and his girlfriend went missing 3 months and 4 days ago, and were presumed dead. Mr. Terrell lived a normal life prior to his disappearance. He received a proper education, was never abused, never had mental health issues, or any sort of violent behavior. All of his friends and family spoke of him quite highly, until they were informed of his actions. Those who knew Mr. Terrell noted that he had always been quite fascinated with superstitions, legends, and mythological creatures. On multiple occasions, he would go on trips to attempt to find these supernatural beings. He has traveled to Scotland to look for the Loch Ness Monster, America to find several creatures including Bigfoot and Mothman, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore to find a Pontianak, as well as several other countries. His most recent interest was the Wendigo. The Wendigo is a Native American legend, but is quite well known in Canada as well. It is somewhat surprising that Mr. Terrell never went looking for the Wendigo earlier than he did. The stories behind the Wendigo vary quite a fair amount. It is typically said to be a spirit that possesses humans and drives them to cannibalism, but it's also said to be its own individual creature which consumes human beings. Some sources also say that humans who resort to cannibalism to survive turn into Wendigos. Wendigos, despite often being depicted as anthropomorphic deer-like creatures, are actually traditionally described as giant humanoids that smell extremely foul and can cause a chill, and in some iterations, a blizzard, wherever they go. Mr. Terrell went looking for the Wendigo on April the 6th. He went with his girlfriend, Iris Hall, 31. They went to Ontario, and explored deep into a forest that will remain unnamed. They informed their family and friends that they would be gone for at least a week, maybe a few days more. An extreme blizzard hit the area they were in, and their families were worried. After they still had not returned after 1 week and 5 days, they were reported as missing. After nearly a month of searching, they were not found, and were declared dead. 2 weeks after this, it was noted that several children were reported missing from towns near the forest. 20 children in 4 days. They found the bodies of several of the missing children, partially consumed. The worst was a 6-year-old boy, who I won't name out of respect for him and his family. I saw the body and, while I won't go into detail, I will note that the damage was so severe it was presumed that a bear had attacked him. Wildlife control was called in to reduce the animal population of any predators in the area. Well over 50 men were deployed and, over the course of the next couple of months, tranquilized and relocated dozens of wolves and bears. But the attacks never stopped, or even slowed. While almost all the missing people were children, a very small number of adults also disappeared. 3 to be precise. 2 men, both aged 23, and 1 woman, aged 21. It is worth noting that all the adults who disappeared were extremely small in stature, and could be mistaken for large children, as opposed to adults. Finally, 3 wildlife control rangers happened across a cave with several bodies surrounding it. They entered. Upon entering, they found Mr. Terrell. He was standing over the remains of a young girl, who has since been identified. She was 12, and was out for a hike when she passed by the cave and was taken. She lived about 2 hours away from the cave. Once again, I will not reveal her name. Due to Mr. Terrell recording everything he and his girlfriend did on the trip with an action camera, we know exactly what happened. The camera was found in the same cave as Mr. Terrell, and there are several videos recovered. The severely decomposed body of Iris Hall was also found. The videos are as follows. Videos 1 to 13, all are simply videos of Terrell and Hall exploring the wilderness. They come across as very likable, good-natured, and simply looking for fun. They kiss a lot, laugh a lot, and really love one another. In videos 8, 9, and 12, they speak about marriage and children. Video 14, after about a week of exploring, Terrell and Hall are ready to head back to civilization. Unfortunately, one of the worst blizzards in history occurred on that day. It would last for several weeks. Weather reports cite the temperature as dropping to 33 degrees Celsius. They took shelter in a cave. They are still extremely upbeat, and perfectly composed. They had camping equipment, and still had enough supplies for another few days. They make a few jokes, set up a small camp slightly far away from the mouth of the cave, then turn the camera off. Video 15, a video of Terrell and Hall exploring the cave. It is quite large. Terrell mentions the Wendigo, and says it might be in there with them. He says that the cannibalism aspect of the Wendigo is what disturbs him the most, and that the very thought of it makes him somewhat nauseous. Hall questions how a human could sink to such depths. The video cuts off abruptly for no reason. Presumably a malfunction. Video 16, another video of the duo exploring the cave. Iris suddenly slips and screams. Terrell rushes towards her. He carries her back to the camp. He pulls the camera off his head. It ends up face down in the dirt. The video lasts for several hours before turning off, presumably due to the camera running out of battery. Video 17, Terrell facing the camera. He is noticeably upset. He remarks that Hall's leg is severely injured, the blizzard still going on, and their food is gone. He says he doesn't recall eating any, and Iris doesn't either. He stares blankly at something off-screen for several seconds, then turns the camera off. Video 18, a goodbye video from Terrell and a barely conscious Hall. Only the upper half of Hall can be seen, due to the lower half of her being covered by a blanket. It is impossible to know the extent of the injury she suffered from. Given how much blood is on the blanket, it can only be assumed it is very severe. The two genuinely think they are going to die. Video 19, another video with Terrell facing the camera. He is scarily thin now. Skin like paper, sunken cheeks, blank expression. He says the blizzard has been going on for a long time, and shows no signs of stopping. He remarks that he is starving to death. He talks about the Wendigo, and mutters something under his breath. The word cannibalism is barely audible. Once again, he looks at something off camera. He turns the video off. Video 19 is the final video. But we can easily deduce what happens. Left with no choice, Mr. Terrell cannibalizes Iris Hall. He has a psychotic breakdown. He cannot live with being a cannibal, and to save himself, convinces himself that he is not a cannibal, he is a Wendigo, and eating humans is simply something he must do. The blizzard ends approximately 6 hours after this. Terrell begins his murder spree. I would now like to cross-reference the story Mr. Terrell wrote with facts that actually occurred. The note was written in French, Mr. Terrell's first language. Firstly, he calls the people he killed, men and women, despite them all being children. He also said that the men who took him were much larger than the ones he normally hunted. Of course, this is due to the former being adults. He may have done this to lessen his guilt. He hunted exclusively children due to how easy they are to capture. Upon finding Mr. Terrell, the Rangers panicked and tranquilized Mr. Terrell. Despite being injected with enough tranquilizer to kill an average male, he survived. They threw him into a truck meant for animals, and immediately drove to the nearest police station. He was placed in a holding cell. When he awoke, he attacked the bars of the cell. One wildlife control ranger was still present to give a statement to the police. He still had his tranq rifle with him, and shot Mr. Terrell yet again, due to the panic he was in. He was not charged for anything, as it was a rather understandable reaction. After the holding cell, Mr. Terrell was later transferred directly to our mental facility, and is currently locked in a room just down the hall. The process of getting him in here was a little scuffed, but we made it happen. We had to. He is without a doubt the most dangerous patient I've ever seen, but also the most fascinating. We feed him exclusively pork, as he spits out anything else we give him. I find it rather interesting that Mr. Terrell called the tranq rifles metal poles, and the truck a metal carriage. Without a doubt he knows what guns and trucks are. He seems to feign ignorance about many things. For instance, not knowing how much time has passed. There is a clock in his room. This shows how far his delusion goes. He has convinced himself that he knows nothing about human technology. Why would he? He's a Wendigo. He also said that he had a foot injury from being hit with a rock. While he did have a hairline fracture, it was nothing major. We gave him a cast. He doesn't seem very fond of it. We do frequently remove Mr. Terrell from his room, but only so we can clean him. He won't do it himself, even though his room has a bathroom. Not to mention, we have to treat his infections and injuries. Living in a cave and eating people for a couple of months is not good for you. As for the sheet of paper he wrote on, I had it placed in his room today. Why? Sometimes, people write down exactly what's wrong with them. Terrell will stay locked up for the rest of his life, and probably die still thinking he's a Wendigo. Nothing anyone has said or done can convince him otherwise. Myself, other doctors, and his friends and family. At least, the few friends and family still willing to see him. Terrell doesn't respond to anything we say. He's pretending not to understand us. We have come to the end of the story of Ned Terrell. Well, maybe not quite. He's already turned into an urban legend, and someday someone will probably make one of those serial killer documentaries about him, and after that a horror movie that'll say, based on true events. It'll probably be called The Canadian Cannibal, or something equally as tasteless. Another thing, Terrell is not entirely unique. Wendigo psychosis, a condition which causes humans to resort to cannibalism, has been observed before. To my knowledge, however, no case of it has ever been officially studied. I believe Terrell will be the first. Although we should probably rename the ailment to Terrell's disorder, or something along those lines. He is simply an insane man, that is all. Certainly not possessed by an evil spirit of any kind. I mean, come on. Wendigos. There's no such thing. Now if you'll excuse me, I must shut my windows. The temperature just took an absolute dive. It's rather chilly now. I think there's a blizzard coming in. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.